Next speaker is Celina Gorre. She's Executive Director of Global Alliance for Chronic Diseases. That's founding research on chronic diseases and disease caused by lifestyle. So on the subject of evidence, Celina is going to talk about, I think, what kind of research we're lacking.
In a second, maybe? Great. Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for the kind invitation to present to you one model of collaboration in terms of addressing NCDs in low and middle income countries in particular. I'm not going to really talk about what evidence we're lacking, but what I am going to talk about is one model of partnership to get more funding into the research community in order to generate this evidence. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our membership, the research network, and sometimes I think that the Global Alliance for Chronic Diseases could be also called the Global Research Network for Chronic Diseases, because as you'll see, we've got two very important stakeholder groups that my team takes care of. We'll talk about how we do it, what our model is, and what the outputs are. So how do we know that we've been successful thus far? And then, of course, what we have on our horizon, what's next. Just two brief slides on the rationale behind the GACD. The group of organizations that make up the Alliance came together several years ago and decided that they wanted to fill this gap of funding research in low and middle income countries focused on non-communicable diseases. And this slide tells you one of the reasons they did that. There's obviously an undue burden on in low and middle income countries of DALYs attributed to NCDs. And also, as we see here, while the least developed countries have minimal levels of burden, the more progress happens, the higher the burden becomes. So there's an acceleration, in other words, linked to development. I tend to think about NCDs as really externalities of economic development, which is really why it's important for us to be thinking about how to address these issues. And of course, we know, being, I'm sure all of you funded by big international organizations, that even despite all of this political will that has been generated with a high-level meeting in New York City at the UN, for example, in 2011, still over 90% of global health funding is focused on infectious diseases. So we're trying to correct that imbalance. We are also quite embedded in the WHO Global Action Plan on NCDs. Objective 5 is really about promoting and supporting national level funding and also sort of general capacity building specifically focused on research. And so the GACD is doing its part in achieving this objective. This is our membership. And as you can see, we've got a lot of the world covered, but there are obviously some glaring regional gaps, including sort of Central Africa, which is a particular area of focus for us to do more work in, and of course, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and the Gulf states. And we also know that the burdens of NCDs are quite heavy in these regions, so it's really important for me in particular to be focused on getting more activity and more funders to focus in those areas. Having said that, though, I'll show you a different map where we can see that there is actually good research activity happening there. Now, despite the fact that 85% of governmental health funding is found within our membership, as I mentioned before, this is still, there is still a big emphasis on infectious diseases when it comes to investments in global health. I also want to make the point that this is actually an alliance of research agencies and not countries. It's convenient for me, and it's sort of shorthand for me to say, oh, we have China and Japan and India. But in fact, we are talking about the main research funders in these countries. And that's important for a number of reasons. One being the fact that there is actually an accountability mechanism. And my board is made up of the heads of these research agencies. So these are the people making the decisions about how much they're going to prioritize NCDs in their global health strategies. There are a number of reasons agencies join us. We have developed mechanisms over the last 5 years that I've been involved to increase efficiencies, to enable a shared development of strategy, and also to make sure that everybody around the table has a shared voice. Now, I'm American, so I can say a little bit about what it means to have the US at the table. And sometimes, unfortunately, we take up a lot of oxygen as Americans because we've got a big purse relative to the others. And so one of my jobs is to make sure that no matter how much money you bring to the table, your voice is equally heard. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of GACD values. This is a bit of the development and the evolution of the GACD over the last several years. And you can see that our membership has increased steadily over the years, but also the interconnectedness of the agencies has also increased. I came on in 2012 to establish the Secretariat, but we've had really a sort of a acceleration of progress over the last several years, and will continue in the coming years. We effectively managed and implemented our first joint peer review across the majority of our agencies last year. And when the NIH and the EC are involved in the GACD, that is no small feat. This year we are establishing our single submission portal, so that's really useful just in terms of the brand and the face of the GACD. And next year we're going to surpass the $100 million US mark in terms of the cumulative total of funding that's gone through the GACD. And hopefully in 2018, we would like to open up the conversation of the research network to a much broader audience, hopefully with some of you involved. This is our network, and you might recognize a few faces here. Mina is here, Brian Oldenburg and Annika are here. These guys are already very much part of our network, and I would encourage you to speak to them if any of you are interested in potentially becoming part of it. But we work hard, but we also play hard, and that's actually quite key to the success of the network. This is where the research happens. So as you can see, we do have research in practically all regions, but again, there still is a big gap from my view in terms of the Middle East region. That's sort of an area of opportunity and also of great need. You can also see in South America, we don't have any research happening in Brazil, but Brazil has recently become a member, so in the next iteration of this map, you will see that there will be much more research activity there. So what do they do when they get together? Well, they do very similar things to what we're doing here. They talk about the research, they think about how to collaborate, and they actually collaborate in practice, generating joint publications, which again, I'll talk about in a second. But one of the best things that I think they do is they talk about failure. And that is actually one of the things that I think the research community doesn't do enough of, is talk about failure. Because how do you learn if everyone is sort of talking about how great the research is all the time? You have to talk about what doesn't work so that you can together problem solve and figure out how to overcome those challenges. This is just the way that different researchers engage with the GACD. And this nomenclature would suggest that you need to be a starter to then advance it to become expert. But I'll tell you, Ms. Mina here became an expert the first day she walked in the room because she said, I want to start a working group, we're going to focus on context, and we established that right away. So it's very much a dynamic group. It's a group that is owned by the researchers. We simply are stewards and facilitators of it. This is a bit of the inside of the GACD. Again, the two main stakeholder groups are agencies and our researchers. And really, I'm going to skip through it, but basically, it's all to say that the agencies are very committed to working together. Skip that as well. And these are who we are currently working with, but also the conversations that have been developing over the last couple of years. Now, values. This is probably the most important slide here. Every voice matters equally. You leave your titles at the door. Nobody gets to be called professor or sir or madam. Everyone is by first name basis, whether you're a PhD student or you've been doing it for 5 decades. And actually, that is, for me, the secret of the success of the organization. These are our outputs. So we know that we're doing well. Everything has a positive trajectory. And probably the two most important things that I'm sure all of you care about is, what about the funding? Well, again, each call, each year, the funding has gone up. And we also have generated joint publications across a minimum of 6 or 7 of the projects. There are 4 that actually last week we just published our 4th one. So this is a prolific and productive group, and this isn't even talking about the ones that happen within the projects themselves. We're working with the World Bank as an implementing partner, and we don't want our research to just sit there idle. We want it to mean something, so we will be contributing to the design of loan packages on the world, as far as the World Bank engagement goes. And I will stop there. Just talking about scale is another really important priority for us, but I know I've got no more time. Thank you.